Good evening. Glad you could be here tonight. We're going to be in John chapter 10. If you'd like to open up to John chapter 10 this evening. We're going to wrap up our summer series this evening. One final lesson. The new quarter starts in September, and so next Wednesday evening we'll have our regular first Wednesday singing. And then the week after that, on Wednesday evening, we'll start back to our kind of regular thing on Wednesday evenings with the new teachers and the new quarter. But this evening, since this is still August, we're going to finish up, kind of wrap up our summer series. And we're going to do that in John chapter 10, looking at what Jesus says when he calls himself the Good Shepherd. In verse 11 of John chapter 10, Jesus calls himself the Good Shepherd. And that's really, you think about what he's talking about there, he's kind of going back to a passage that's really probably very familiar for us, and that is Psalm 23. Psalm 23 that says, "The Lord is my shepherd, that I shall not want." And I think that's so well known because it's such a comforting thought, isn't it? It's a comforting thought to think about a God who shepherds us gently, who leads us to still waters and to green pastures, who takes such good care of us. But what if a person's understanding about who the Lord is, who the shepherd is, was mistaken? What if something about him they didn't understand or didn't believe correctly? Or what if just their entire idea about him was completely wrong? And so if their understanding of him is wrong, then it's safe to assume that the blessings that they get from him are not the true blessings, that they're not really getting the blessings that God wants to give to them. What if you were following a counterfeit shepherd, someone who wasn't really what Jesus looks like? There's a lot of versions of Jesus out there, a lot of different definitions of Jesus, a lot of different ways that people describe Jesus that don't really match what the Bible says. And so this summer we've looked at several different lessons and had a lot of good speakers about who is the Christ. And I want to end that in John 10 tonight because I think that John chapter 10 gives us one of these really clear pictures of who the Christ is. He wants you to know who he is, and so he tells you very plainly, and he wants you to know how he shepherds so that you can recognize him very easily. First of all, in verses 1 through 6, John chapter 10 and verses 1 through 6, he says that there is a legitimate shepherd. There's only one legitimate shepherd, and that's who he is. It starts in verse 1, he says, "Most assuredly I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs up some other way, the same is a thief and a robber." In other words, he says there's always going to be others who try to distract you. Whether that's other definitions of Jesus or just other things in life, there's always going to be things that are trying to climb over that wall and to steal your attention, to steal your loyalty. But he says there's only one true. He says, verse 2, "But he who enters by the door is the shepherd of the sheep." There's a door that had to be gone through, and only one shepherd, only one person could go through that door. And it's the legitimate way to go. And we'll look at this more in a minute. But when he references the door there, what he's really talking about is someone had to die and be buried and be raised from the dead. He's the only one that did that. He's the only one that could do that. And so that's why he is the legitimate shepherd. He goes on in verse 3 and says, "To him the doorkeeper opens, and the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name, and he leads them out. And when he brings out his own sheep, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. Yet they will by no means follow a stranger, but will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers." And it says in verse 6, Jesus used this illustration, but they did not understand the things which he spoke to him. There's one shepherd, he has gone through the door, and he says the sheep know his voice. But in verse 6 it says those people there didn't. They didn't understand him. They didn't know what he was saying. And what that shows us is, for the sheep to know his voice, they've got to prepare themselves to know his voice. They've got to learn what his voice sounds like. They've got to spend time listening to his voice so that if someone says something that doesn't match with his voice, they're able to hear that. They're able to recognize that and say, "Now that's not what I think Jesus would say about that." that's not how I understand it. And then we might have to go back to the Bible and double check for ourselves and be sure that we understand it right. But if we're going to know if someone is speaking differently than our shepherd, we've got to really know what our shepherd says. We've got to get used to what his voice sounds like in the scriptures. But if we know his voice, then we'll know how to tap into all of his blessings. That's what he tells us in verses 7 through 10. Starting in verse 7, he tells us he is the shepherd of abundance who gives good gifts. He says, Jesus said to them, verse 7, most assuredly I say to you, I am the door of the sheep. All who ever came before me are thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not hear him. He goes on in verse 9 and says, I am the door. If anyone enters by me, he will be saved and will go in and out and find pasture. There's always been people who wanted to get everyone's attention, but Jesus is the only one who is worth it because in verse 10, if we enter through the door that he has made, he says, we shall be saved. Now, notice how he makes this connection here. He said back in verse 2 that the shepherd enters by the door. And that is the death he had to die and be buried and raised from the dead so that we could enter through the door. And he says on the other side of that door is salvation. What is the path that we enter? What's the door that we go through that's like his door? Well, he says in Romans chapter 6, he says that baptism is like his door. That's our death and burial and resurrection. And if we go through that door, on the other side of it, we have salvation. He says in verse 9, if anyone enters by me, he will be saved. And that's when we come to the place where we can go in and out to find pasture. He says in verse 10, the thief does not come except to steal and to kill and destroy, but I have come that they may have life, and that they may have it more abundantly. Every other version of Jesus, all that they could do is take from you and kill and destroy. Every other distraction of life, every other thing that you could give your attention or your loyalty to, whether that's a person or a job or technology or whatever it is, all it can do is take from you and kill and destroy. Only Jesus can give life, but it's more than just life. He promises eternal life, that we can live on forever and ever, but he says it's more than just life. He says life and life abundant. It's not just life forever and ever. It's a life that's fulfilling. It's a life that's satisfying in every possible way. It's a life that even when all of the physical things are going wrong, we still feel whole. We still feel full. We still feel that we have purpose and place, and it's life abundance. It's life to the fullest. And the door leads us to that life. We must enter by his door so that we can have all that he offers us. And if we feel unsatisfied, if we feel like we don't have that fullness, it might be because there's something about Jesus we've misunderstood. There's something about him that we're following counterfeit, what some other person said and not what Scripture said. It might be because we're just focusing on the wrong things. If he's promising us life abundant and yet we don't feel that we have life abundant, because he went through the door to give us that. And he can provide for each of us because he knows each of us so well. That's what he says there. If you continue, he says that in verses 11 through 14. He says in verse 11, I am the good shepherd. Now, good here is a little bit of a different word. It's kind of the idea of something that is beautiful because of how useful it is. There are some things that are beautiful to look at, and there are other things that are beautiful, maybe not physically, but because of how useful they are. You know, someone who's had the same truck for 50 years and it's rusty and beaten up, but it runs really well. To them, that truck is beautiful, right? Because of how useful, how much he's put into it, something like that. And so here, that's what he's talking about. He says, I am the good shepherd. I am the shepherd that does useful things. I am the shepherd that provides and helps. This is the idea of Psalm 23, where he talks about leading us to quiet pastures, to quiet waters. He says, he restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. That when we go through the valley of the shadow of death, he has a rod and a staff, and that's comforting to us, that he's able to protect us and to discipline us, to keep us safe. He says, My cup runs over. This is the abundant life. This is the satisfying life that he's describing there, because he is the good shepherd, the one who can do so many useful things about us. And he does it because he cares for us. Verse 12, he says, the hireling, he who is not the shepherd, he who does not own the sheep, he sees the wolf coming, he leaves the sheep and he flees. And the wolf catches the sheep and he scatters them. The hireling flees because he is a hireling and he does not care about the sheep. But that's not Jesus. Jesus cares so much for us that he would die for us. He has given up everything. And he keeps us safe even now if we hear his voice and we follow it. He protects us no matter what. He says in verse 14, I am the good shepherd, and I know my sheep, and I'm known by my own. Because he knows everything about us, every inch of who we are, and because he cares for us so deeply, he is able to provide whatever it is that we need. He is good so that he is able to give in abundance everything that we need. And it started when he gave the greatest sacrifice. Verse 15 says that. He says, as the Father knows me, even so I know the Father. They know each other back and forth in every possible way. They always have and always will. And this is what they know together. They know that he lays down his life. I lay down my life for the sheep. They have always known that he would do this. Even before the world was created, 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 19 through 20. 1 Peter 1, 19 through 20 tells us, even before the world was created, they have always known that he would lay down his life for the sheep. And so he goes on in verse 16, he says, and other sheep I have, which are not of this fold. Them also I must bring, and they will hear my voice, and there will be one flock and one shepherd. I love this verse because, of course, he's talking to the Jews, but he's telling the Jews, they don't understand it yet, but he's telling the Jews that the Gentiles are included in all of this. All the people here who are not of Jewish descent, even here at this time, Jesus is thinking about you too. And he says, someday, Jew and Gentile, everyone in the world, will be brought. And did you notice what he said? He said, brought into one flock. One flock. He's always promised to just have one church, one body, one people, one kingdom, one flock, that he would be the one shepherd over. And so the world says a lot of things about who Jesus is. The world says a lot of things about who Jesus accepts or doesn't accept. But Jesus says here, he accepts those who hear his voice and go through his door and are part of just one flock and only one flock. And if someone's definition of Jesus is anything different than that, that's a counterfeit Jesus. And it's not the Jesus that can give all of the blessings, the life abundant that he has promised us here. He continues then in verse 17, therefore my Father loves me, because I lay down my life that I may take it again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of myself. I have power to lay it down. I have power to take it again. This command I have received from my Father. He didn't just sacrifice himself. He did it willingly. From before the creation of the world, he was willing to do it. Before he came down to earth, he was willing to do it. And then again as human, although it was hard to do it, although he prayed not to have to do it, he willingly did it when it came down to it, because he wants to give us that life and life abundant. And so he is the shepherd who sacrifices himself for one flock, and he does it willingly. And so he finishes this chapter then, from verse 19 all the way to the end. This is the point of the rest of the chapter. What will you do? Make a choice about Jesus. Decide what to do from here. It says in verse 19, there was division among the Jews because of these sayings, and many of them said, well, he has a demon and he's mad. Why do you listen to him? But others were thinking harder about it, and they said, these are not the words of one who has a demon. Can a demon open the eyes of the blind? this doesn't match my version of the Messiah, is what they were saying. This is not what I thought the Messiah came to do. This is not what I thought he was going to say or how he was going to be. And other people are saying, well, even if it's not what we thought, look at the evidence. Could he be anyone else but the one promised to us? He goes on in verse 25 or verse 24, and it says, the Jews surrounded him and said to him, how long do you keep us in doubt? If you are the Christ, tell us plainly. And so Jesus answered them. He said, I told you, and you do not believe. Now, when had he told them? When he performed all the miracles, that's when he told them. It's the same as when John the Baptist had his moments of doubt. You know, he sent his disciples when he was in prison to ask Jesus, are you really the Christ? I just want to be sure about this. And what does Christ tell them? He doesn't say yes or no. He just says, look at the evidence. Look at the people who were healed. Look at the people who were possessed with demons, and I brought it out of them. Look at the Old Testament prophecies that promised that the Messiah would do all these things, and I'm doing them all. Jesus didn't say yes or no because the evidence spoke for itself, because they should have just been able to reason through this. And that's what he says in verse 25. I told you, and you do not believe. The works that I do, the miracles that I perform, the teachings that I give, they bear, in my Father's name, they bear witness of me. But you do not believe because you are not of my sheep. In other words, you don't believe because you don't want to. You don't believe because you've chosen not to, because there are changes you would have to make to be my sheep and you don't want to make them. Verse 27, my sheep hear my voice and I know them and they follow me, and I give them eternal life, and they shall never perish, neither shall anyone snatch them out of my hand. My Father who has given them to me is greater than all, and no one is able to snatch them out of my Father's hand. I and my Father are one. They have the power to protect us, to keep us safe. We can always walk out of the Father's hands, but if we choose to stay in it, we are secure because we have a good shepherd who knows how to provide whatever it is that we need to be faithful. And so verse 31, the Jews took up stones to stone him. And he asked them a question. He says, many good works I have shown you from my Father. For which of these works do you stone me? And they say, it's not for the works. It's because of what you said. It's because of blasphemy. It's because you claim to be one with God. And Jesus goes on to kind of say, well, if I claim to be one with God, that would be a problem, except, verse 37, if I do not do the works of my Father, then do not believe me. Right? If someone just says that they can do these things, but they can't do it, you don't have to believe that guy. That guy's clearly lying or he's insane. But verse 38, if I do, though you do not believe me, believe the works. Believe the evidence. Believe what everything points to, that you may know and believe that the Father is in me and I am in him. And verse 39 says that that crowd did not believe him. But when it gets into verse 40, we have a different group. He went away again beyond the Jordan to the place where John was baptizing at first, and there he stayed. And many came to him and said, they're thinking about John because they're at the place where John baptized people. They're thinking about John and said, John performed no sign, but all these things that John spoke about this man were true. Right? John performed no signs. There's no extra evidence from John, but everything John said is coming true. And he does perform miracles, and that's proof in and of itself. God doesn't allow people who are lying to perform miracles, and so all the evidence is pointing to this. And so it's not what we thought the Messiah was supposed to be. It's not what we thought he was going to do. But verse 42, many believed in him there anyways, because they just followed the evidence. They just were honest with themselves, honest with what God's word said, honest with the miracles, and honest with God, and said, it has to be so because it all lines up. If a person has been taught wrong about who Jesus is, that's not your fault. How could you know any better than what someone chose to teach you, parents or preacher, whoever it is? If a person was taught wrong about who Jesus is, that's not your fault. But once you discover who he is, once you see the truth for it, the question is, what do you do with him then? Do you dig in and say, well, that's not what I've always heard. like the Jews did through most of this? Or do you just say, if this is what God's word says, if all the evidence points here, I've got to go where the evidence points to? Or if you've allowed distractions to pull your attention away from the Good Shepherd, if your life feels less than, if it feels empty because you've put something else in the place of Jesus, you're missing out on the life abundant. And you may be going down a road that will cut you off ultimately from life eternal. If there's any confusion about Jesus, if there is any distraction in your life that you need help with, that's what we're here for tonight. And we'd ask that you come forward now as we stand and as we sing.
255. 255.